After e4, d5, pawn takes, and queen takes, and knight c3, in this video I'm going to go through queen e5. There's still a lot of stuff to talk about with queen d8, but that will be in the next video coming soon. Now this is check, and this variation might be annoying for a lot of players. The best move is bishop e2 because you don't want to block the bishop by going queen e2, neither suggest a swap. After bishop e2, the main move is bishop g4. The idea now is to prevent the knight from going to f3. You can't develop the knight because then bishop takes, we have to take with the pawn, break the pawn structure and double up the pawn, and we don't want that. Now the right move is d4. Now there's two main options, either bishop takes, queen takes is not possible because we also have a knight defending that. Either bishop takes, it comes with an attack on the queen, or a queen just moving away, keeping the pin. Also because we have two attackers on g4. So that means that the queen can't leave the pin. Let's start by bishop takes. Now here we take with the knight. Taking with the queen is wrong because then this pawn is hanging. And now the pawn is attacking the queen will have to move. The queen cannot go for the attack on the weak king side in a way like queen g5 is not possible because of our bishop. And so the whole idea of this queen e5 check Scandinavian is neutralized already. Now the queen has to move. So let's start with queen e6. The best move now is d5. And now queen to g6. So the idea of playing e6 was in order to go to g6 and put pressure on this square. And queen f6, by the way, is really bad. White's advantage now is much more clear. After white castles and then plays bishop to f4, white's putting a lot of pressure on the c7 square and ideas knight b5 or knight d5 depending on how black plays. So after castling, if black plays this move like c6, then we don't have that bishop f4 idea on knight b5, knight d5 because c6 seems to be solving everything. But this now allows us an attack with the tempo. Black has to move the queen again. The game is a little bit silly. And so now black queen will have to go to g6, reaching the same position but wasting more tempos. Now white goes on with knight c5, attacking this pawn, and that creates a weakness on the light squares next to the king. After b6, to make an example, and knight d3, this bishop will not be able to develop properly because after e6, white continues with rook e1, and white's development is just too much better. White now has a threat of playing knight e to f4, attacking the queen once again, and so after a move like bishop to d6, white goes on with knight f4, and the queen will have to move again, or the bishop could take the knight. Bishop takes the knight doesn't really neutralize white's initiative. If black player doesn't take the knight, plays queen back to f6, for example, white continues harassing the queen. Knight h5, knight is protected, queen has to move again, white forces a swap of bishops. Or at least white simply develops another piece and forces the black player to retreat. But white's attack is inevitable. Moves like if knight e5 will come, and so after a swap of bishop, for example, knight takes back, the queen will have to go back to the 5th rank or to the 6th rank over here to h6, because if the queen goes somewhere along the 5th rank, then the rook is coming. The knight will keep an eye on the square g7 for a check, and it will be able to be supported by the queen and by the other knight or even by the other rook. Queen is easily trappable there. The advantage now is something like +9. If the queen will go to h6, then this will come with knight e6, and this knight cannot be taken back because, so for example, pawn takes, rook takes, queen has to take knight, and then it looks like the material will be like not enough because we have queen and rook against two rooks and two knights. But after queen to g4, check, and then the rook entering the game with check, or let's say king to d6, or even to f7 if it looks safer, the queen can keep harassing the king until the rook comes into the game. So queen h5 check, king moves, and now rook e1 comes with a mate in 13, which we're not going to be able to find already, but clearly we have an idea of how this is going to happen. The knight will not be able to develop because the rook is coming in and the queen as well. The idea of the white player now, even if black were to play, the best move is to play rook e3 and simply come into the game. Right, so that was just an insight of how things go after queen f6. So after, let's make a recap, queen check, bishop, and then bishop g4, we have to play d4. In the variation where they take the bishop, knight takes back, and now the queen can't go to f6, it's just wrong. Let's go through e6, that's what we were going for at the beginning. D5 and then queen g6, white castles, and now it's black to move. Here, pushing the pawns is bad because let's say e6, white goes on with bishop f4, and white has an advantage of something about +5. This pawn e6 is wrong because you're not really going to take this pawn because it's a disaster. Look at this king, look at our development, our rook, our knight improving the position in every aspect. Bishop f4, putting pressure on c6 is crucial. White's development is amazing. We also have some idea of isolating the pawn, and if queen takes, we're going to play rook e1 with the tempo, so that's really bad. A move like c6 is, for example, it looks kind of natural in these type of setups. If white takes, then the knight can develop. White goes on with the same idea, bishop f4. And it looks like we're not really putting pressure on c7, but again, taking is wrong because that just helps the development of our pieces. And the knight doesn't have any good squares to go to. Let's say knight d7. Now white can realize the importance of having this bishop in such a great square, because white plays knight d4. Taking the pawn here is wrong because we're not really breaking or isolating the pawn here, because the queen can go and pick up the pawn. Best move is knight to d4, putting more pressure on this pawn for real, forcing the pawn to get isolated or the pawn to take us, and then knight to d5 coming with this idea. And it's really hard for black to keep the game going. And pawn pushing is met by knight c to b5, and the idea of going to this c7 square. Black obviously cannot castle because knight a7 is mate, and another way to save the rook will be rook to c8. b8 and d8 is not possible. b8 gets taken, d8 gives a mate, so rook c8 is met by knight takes pawn, attacking the rook, and then after you might argue that the rook is going to an open file. Then the knight just goes back and keeps the threat. White doesn't really worry about losing this knight, so to go back at the previous position, here after knight jumps here, the pawn taking the knight is not a problem because knight check, and then we go up the exchange. This knight is going out, going back safe to c7. Best move after queen to e4, attacking this pawn and attacking this bishop, is met by bishop check, and now the king moves. If the king moves to the c file, that's ideal because we play c4 to support the central pawn. Taking with the pawn is a suicide because then the rook will be coming into the game. If the king goes on to e8 square, white simply retreats the bishop to g3. We have an escape square. This pawn cannot be taken because of knight c7, and white has much better development and black is just far away from castling. So now this leads us to a quick recap of the queen e6 idea. So check, bishop e2, bishop g4, d4, bishop takes, knight takes, queen e6, d5 and queen g6. And now we're going through knight f6. We explained why pawn's moves are silly and the bishop can't really fianchetto. So after knight f6, white continues with the very natural rook e1, and now white has a plan. If white were to play again, the move would be knight b5, and white's advantage is huge. A move like knight a6 doesn't work to stop the threat because of c4 supporting the pawn in d5, and eventually white will be winning the pawn in f7. After the bishop is developed, rook in c8 will be met by knight a7, so that doesn't work. So the knight now is confined to the square a6, which is silly, and the knight will not be able to move anymore. We're going to play bishop f4, go for the pawn. A move like c6 here is to be punished immediately, because we can take the pawn. And after pawn takes back, we play knight f4. And now we're opening the file on the king, exploiting better development. The pawn is pinned, knight d6 is coming, it's inevitable. And there's an attack on the queen. Pretty much everything wins here. In this position, we're saying that the knight b5 threat is huge. So if black plays knight to b7, let's go ahead and play knight b5. And we're winning material no matter what. Unless black plays king to d8, which we're going to go through. But let's take a moment. What happens after black player decides to give up the pawn in a7? We can take it for free. King moves and black may think, okay, the king is castle, yeah, I've lost the pawn, but at least I've got a rook on the same file of the queen. The white player now is forced to move knight to b5, it's our best move. And after knight to b6, black has a lot of attack on d5, and so black might have chosen to give up the pawn for the sake of development. White is completely winning after bishop f4, threatening this. Can the black player not just play a knight move? Well, no, because knight takes is still met by bishop c7. Yeah, we're winning the exchange. If knight takes, we have this. Let's go back. What happens after king d8? White continues with knight f4, attacking the queen. The queen will have to move, but she has to be very careful. If the queen goes to a dark square, then we have a check in e6 with the bishop attacking the queen. So the queen has to be careful, has to go in a light square. h5 is not accessible, so f5. Black has already lost the right to castle and cannot develop these two pieces, at least for the moment. Now white continues with knight d4, still attacking the queen. The queen is forced to move again. Again, the queen cannot go to a dark square, neither one of these ones, because they're all taken. And so the queen's forced to go to g4, maybe hoping for a swap. This is met by f3. The queen could have gone to g4 earlier as well, but still met by f3. And now the game is over. So back at this position, after knight f6 and white plays rook to e1, we know we have a threat of playing knight b5 and everything that happens next. What happens after black plays c6? This is met by knight d4, which we also went through the same motif earlier. Black can't really take this pawn because of knight b5 and the whole bishop f4 idea. And so right now, having this pawn in d5 is awesome because it keeps an eye on e6, and we have a rook already developed. We owe this to the fact that the black player wasted too many tempos with the queen. So black's best move now is a6. Now here, we don't have the knight b5 idea anymore. So that means we have to take this pawn. So we isolate the opponent pawn if he takes the knight, we take the knight. And now he has an isolated pawn, and this is met by queen f3, attacking this pawn, which stops the obvious rook d8 idea. Black's only move not to lose the pawn is rook to c8, which also unpins the pawn, and white continues with queen e2. Our superiority in development and pawn structure is going to lead us to win. Black now will have to do something about the development of his pieces. After e6, we will win the pawn in a6 with an attack on the rook, and things are looking awesome. Can black avoid white from winning the pawn in a6? But basically yes, but then the black player will have to sacrifice his development even further. It's just never going to develop. a5 is simply met by queen a6 anyway after all. The best move of the engine suggested is queen to g4, protecting the rook, but white still has a great advantage after taking this pawn and producing a passed pawn.